Hi, welcome to the bathtub. This is the old masturbator, Scott Bradfield, the old masturbator's parakeet. We had the old masturbator's dog in here about 5 minutes ago. First, I started filming this 5 or 10 minutes ago without the hat. And Dodo has just become, as soon as she hears the beeping in the camera. So anyway, we're going to try it again. Marlon Perkins of literature. We're hiding in the brush with Dodo while Jim wrestles the literature, the line of literature, which is today Philip K. Dick's Mary and the Giant. Now, many of you who are old Philip K. Dick fans, and I know there's a lot of you out there, may not know his non-SF novels. But he wrote about 6 or 8 of them. I forget exactly. But he wrote quite a few of them, particularly in the late 50s, mid to late 50s. And I think he kind of gave up around the early 60s, maybe in 1960. He was writing a lot of SF for the pulp magazines in the late 50s, early 60s. He wrote some early novels, which most of which I don't think are very good. We've had disagreements out there. Some of you like, but Vulcan's Hammer I found kind of boring. Dr. Futurity, some of these books that he wrote for the magazines. The Unteleported Man was pretty interesting, and I think he rewrote that later in life. But he was writing a lot of short stories, and a lot of his short stories in the magazines are still quite good. And if you get any collections of short stories by Philip K. Dick, you're going to find some pretty interesting stuff in there. But in the 50s and 60s, he was writing called mainstream, but they were just novels without any fantastic events occurring in them. I've got a few of them here. The one that was published in his lifetime was Confessions of a Crap Artist. And a crap artist is someone who does like science fiction and comic books and junk like that, stuff that we like. And I can't remember, but I didn't remember reading and enjoying this. This was actually published during Philip K. Dick's lifetime. I thought I'd show a few of the books you guys know. So you know Man in the High Castle, probably. Those of you who slightly know Philip K. Dick or know his science fiction will know this book. It's his alternate history as if Germany and Japan had won World War II. And what makes it interesting is that you have people in this alternate universe in which the fascist forces have taken over California and are running the world, are actually having glimpses of a world in which the Allies won the war, but it's a very different world from the one we live in. So it's kind of like these department store mirrors where you see all these reflections of reality. And he has a way of getting into the lives of really kind of mundane, boring people. People with really crappy jobs, there's one guy I remember who he regrooves retread tires in a couple of his novels, and people who have really crummy jobs. Because Philip K. Dick obviously had a lot of crummy jobs. So that's his most famous one. We're not going to talk about his kind of... We've been talking a little about the early Philip K. Dick over the past couple of years, because I've been kind of reading through him in sequence just to check him out and read some of these early ones, which I'd never read. One of my favorites is Flow My Tears, The Policeman Said. I don't want to tell you what it's about, but I read this when it came out, and I reread it, and I enjoyed it. A lot of the times I reread Philip K. Dick, and I don't like him as much as the first time. I loved this the first time I read it. This is The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch. I can't even explain the title. It's a completely wacky novel. And I've read it a few times, so I've taught it in classes. And if you're in the right mood, it's great fun. I think he was very influenced by one of the other writers we've talked about, A.E. Van Vogt, who would just wake up every night and come up with another crazy idea. And there's a little of that kind of weird shifts of reality in Philip K. Dick that you get from some of Van Vogt's novels. But anyway, we're not going to talk too much about those. We're just going to talk a little bit because I've been kind of busy with these 2 larger reading projects, so I haven't been able to do these talks. And then when I do, this damn bird it's driving me crazy. Here's some other of the So in the 50s, he wrote these novels, these mainstream novels, usually over 5 or 6 weeks. He wrote very quickly. And he couldn't find publishers for any of them, so it was a total failure. And some of the other ones are Humpty Dumpty in Oakland. I want to say that was the last mainstream novel he wrote, but I'm not sure. I think he finished that in 1960. This one, which has got... These are the British paperbacks. The Man Whose Teeth Were All Exactly Alike. I don't know what it's about, but it's kind of a cool cover. And we mentioned Confessions of a Crap Artist. And I've got some other ones floating around. In Milton Lumpke territory, there's another one. But anyway, I read this one because I think I'd read it, Mary and the Giant. What I like about reading Philip K. Dick's non-science fiction novels is and it's true of his SF novels as well, is he was a real Westerner. He was a real Californian. He knew California very well and lived in it most of his life. So he writes about California neighborhoods and areas. And this is set in a place, I want to say it sounds like Gilroy, or it's somewhere around outside of San Jose, in one of the suburbs. And of course, this is in the 50s, so they're much smaller suburbs than they are now before the Silicon Valley turned it all into this big megalopolis of suburban crap. There are these small little towns. And this is about a girl. It's a very interesting book for Philip K. Dick. It's about a girl named Mary Ann. Basically, she's the central character. And it's a girl who works, again, crappy jobs. I think she's a typist in some terrible company. They sell chrome furniture. Everything. People have all these horrible jobs at Philip K. Dick, and they make crap. And they make chrome furniture for this old couple, and she hates her job. And she's only 20. And he really gets a good sense of the kind of emptiness of being 20 years old in this country. I think it's worse now. But in the 50s, where you really couldn't do much except take crappy jobs. Okay, we got to go with the hat back on. Except take crappy jobs and try to make a little bit of money. And she's interested in doing something more than just doing crappy jobs. So she hangs out with there's a black a jazz singer in town who at a club, and there's a pianist who plays the piano for him at this club. And she likes to hang out with all these kind of interesting, odd characters. And so it's about her friendships with all these people. At the beginning of the book, the giant, I guess, Philip K. Dick used to run a record store. And this is about a man who starts a record store. He's wanted all his life, wanted to run a classical record store somewhere in California because he loves classical music and classical LPs and sound systems, about which Philip K. Dick writes fairly convincingly. And it's about this man who shows up in town. I forget his name. But he just shows up in town and decides he's going to build his record store there. And he sets it up, and he wants to hire somebody. And he invites, in an early scene, he invites Mary Ann to come apply for a job, and he makes a pass at her. And she says, "Oh, piss off." And she goes away, and she doesn't really deal with this guy for a lot of the time. And she goes from one crappy job to another, and one relationship to another. And I don't want to say much more than that, except it does give a really good sense of kind of California life and being a young person in the 50s. And it doesn't have any kind of weird science fiction reality shifting. It's a very kind of mundane, interesting, well written literary novel. So I enjoyed it, and I will probably read some more of his books and perhaps reread Confessions of a Crap Artist as I read my way along. Again, at the same time, he was writing books. The science fiction books he was writing weren't as interesting. It's actually a much more interesting book than some of the things like Vulcan's Hammer, and he hadn't yet kind of, I guess, given up on writing about these sort of people who he definitely has an affection for and some understanding for in Mary and the Giant. And the title, The Giant, it's a kind of this. She gets involved with this guy who runs the record store, and because he comes from outside of this little crummy little town, he seems like this huge presence to her. He's much older than her. Anyway, he does the relationship quite well, I think. All right, so it's called Mary and the Giant, Philip K. Dick, written sometime in the 50s, published after his death, well into the 80s. This would have come out. I remember when this came out in London, published in 1989, several years after he died. And if you want to read his SF, then his best SF is really in the 60s and the 70s. Then I think those three are ones that we're going to try. We're going to take those in the bathtub eventually. I'm trying to work my way up to them. All right. Happy bathing. We'll do a few more of these soon. Been kind of remiss. And pure mountain water, cruel light of day. No pixels. Stay safe.